and welcome to another Every Tuesday tutorial. This week I wanted to change things up a little bit and just share a process video. So sometimes, especially for me, it really helps when I just see someone make a thing, like just the actual process of watching someone make something. So in an effort to share that point of view, instead of just getting into all the nitty-gritty, super hyper details, I just wanted to walk you through my process of creating exactly what you see on screen. This is the final outcome of this tutorial. We're going to be making this together. So I want to walk you through how I started with my sketches and then I brought it here, and then kind of the decisions I made while I was putting it on the iPad. So this is the iPad Pro. It's 12.9 inches. I got the 256 gig, which is the largest size it currently comes in. I just didn't want to deal with space issues ever, and I knew I was going to be making a lot of art, so that was why I made that decision. I also have the Apple Pencil right here. The Apple Pencil only works with an iPad Pro, so if you are interested or want to play around with your pre-existing iPad, you won't be able to get the pressure settings that you can with an iPad Pro, but I know that they make styluses that are compatible with older versions of iPads. So this program that I'm using is called Procreate. It's in the App Store. I think it's like $5 or $6, but totally worth it. There's a bunch of different capabilities. It's very similar to Photoshop if you're familiar with that. So that's the program we're going to be using. So just kind of walking you through my process. I'm going to turn this off for a second so you can see my sketches. So I like making sketches before I start anything. I guess that's just how I'm wired, just from a traditional aspect of sketching things out before you turn them digital. So I have this quote, "Practice makes better," and I was kind of playing around with some different ideas of how to articulate the most important parts or exaggerate them. So I kind of started over here just writing it all out in script and then playing around with some hierarchy here where this is smaller and then better is larger, mixing up all caps versus script. So I like just drawing out a whole bunch of different variations and then kind of seeing what I'm most drawn to, or just what I like the best. So my favorite layout of these, I think, is probably this one. I like how the scale is so different between these and that there's that mixture of cap and script. And then I've got some decorative elements, which I played around with this, but I didn't really like it. So that's why we ended up going with what you saw on screen earlier. So this is where we're starting from, and then evolving it on the iPad. So just to give you some behind the scenes, that was my process with figuring out how I wanted to write out the quote before I went straight to the iPad. I think it's always a good practice to get out. In art school, they always say get out the bad ideas first, where they make you draw like 100 thumbnails before they even look at your next thumbnails, just to know that you didn't waste time. So okay, so we're going to hop back into Procreate, and I'm just going to go back to my gallery, create a new document. I'm creating a Retina document. That's my favorite size. So in here, I know that I kind of want to use my flat marker, which I use a lot. The only downside to the flat marker is it's got a super soft edge, and I want to show you how to do something cool in Procreate that I learned last week. So soft edge brushes don't always work the best with that, but I'll show you. This is kind of how it looks. So there's that soft edge right there, and it's got some nice texture in it, which I really like. It's not totally opaque, but we're going to adjust this a little bit. So I'm going to go back, and if I just write out practice, you'll see why. I feel like so whenever it's super thick, I'm putting a lot of pressure on my pencil, and when it's super thin, I'm not. So it doesn't look like it, but I'm definitely putting lots of pressure, little pressure, lots of pressure, little pressure. So this doesn't quite look like the pen that I use here. This is a much finer stroke, so I need to reduce this down a little bit. And even if I reduce the actual size of my brush, my difference, that is not a good example. The difference between my light and my heavy is a little too extreme, so I want to reduce that a little bit. So this is what I usually do. So I'm going to clear this. I'm just going to push this over, clear it, come over to my brushes, move this over, choose duplicate to create a new one, and now I'm going to edit the settings with this. So these are your tapers, the ends, and if you're not sure about any of these settings, check out the video I posted last week on making a custom brush. So I'm going to speed through these really quick. So I'm just going to reduce my stroke taper, Reduce the scatter. Let's see, I don't need to do anything there. I don't want to mess with my opacity at all. I want it to be super opaque. And let's see, size limits. This is a good place to, I'm gonna bring this down to like 30. So the closer these are together, the less variation in weight you'll have, which is what I was talking about earlier. So my thicks and my thins will be more closely together the closer these are together. And I'm just gonna not have any opacity change. Okay, so that looks good. So if I write it out now, this is feeling better. Okay, so this is what I want to use. That feels good. All right, so now that I've got it down, I'll usually write it out a bunch of times until I'm super happy with how it's looking, but for the sake of time, I'll move along a little quicker. So I've got my color palette right here that I defined earlier. So basically you can create any color palette that you want. All you have to do is hit this little arrow down here and it brings up your palettes. This is the new one that I created. So if you want to create a new one, you can just hit the plus sign. And if you don't want it, you can delete it. So I created a new one. You can name it by tapping it. And to add the colors, so that's the one that'll show up down here. So if you want to get rid of any of the colors in your palette, all you have to do is tap and kind of hold it for a second, and then you can drag it and it'll go away. To add a color into your palette, you can just define it over here and then just tap any of these squares down here and it'll add it in. And then I'm just going to delete that. So then it's gone. Okay, so this is the palette that I defined for this layout. You can define color values here as well if you'd like to do it that way. So I'm going to start by defining a background color for this, which I want it to be dark blue. So on my first layer, I'm just going to come over to the color palette, choose the darker teal that I have right here, and just drag it in, and it'll fill the whole thing, which is a nice little trick. I'm going to create a new layer. Layers are definitely your friend when you're working in Procreate. I'm going to grab this light yellow color, and we're going to grab our new flat marker adjusted brush, which you can tell if you don't rename it. There's usually a little, like up in the little upper left-hand corner, there's a little symbol that lets you know edited brushes. The default brushes don't have them. Okay, so I'm going to write out practice. Okay, and then I'm going to switch to gray for makes. And if I want this scooted over just a little bit, all I have to do is grab my little selection tool right here, and then I can just draw around it, just the portion I want to move. Then if I hit my arrow up here, I can move it over and just affect that selection. When I'm done, I can just hit the brush and then I'm back to normal. I'm going to draw out a little burst, and then I'm going to write out better. Okay. Oh, one thing I want to mention is I do have an entire class on iPad lettering. It's an intro to iPad lettering class, so if you want to take things any further, I'll leave a link on screen and in the video description if you want to check that out. I just noticed I want to move better over, so we're going to use the same thing that we did before. So I'm just going to select, draw around my selection, grab my cursor, and then I can just move it so it feels more centered. Okay. Now all this is kind of low. I want it more centered in general. So if I just tap on the arrow, it'll just select everything on the layer that I currently have selected. So then I can grab everything and move it before I draw in my doodles. So that looks pretty good. Feels pretty centered. Okay, so I'm going to create a new layer for my little doodles. I'm going to grab my light blue for this, and then I'm just going to draw doodles. And I usually like making my artboard a little smaller just by squeezing, so then I can go off the edges, because once you get up here, you can tap these by accident, or you'll tap your size and your opacity slider over here by accident. You don't want to do that. So if you squeeze it down a little bit, it makes it really so much easier. So I'm just going to draw these little doodads, these little swirls all over the place, bleeding off the edges. And I'll speed up the video so you don't have to watch me do every single one of these. Okay, so that looks pretty good. One last thing that I wanted to mention is if you ever want to change the color of something, this is where that kind of soft edge comes in. Like if I wanted to change the color of these little swirls that go around here and I just want to do a select few of them, like if I want to change some of them to the yellow, I can just grab the color and drag it onto it and it'll fill it in. So that's kind of cool if you wanted to go around and change certain individual ones. But if you can get in close, the edges sometimes will show up if you have a soft edge. So if you have a hard edge, then you won't get any weirdness with an extra color in there. The other cool little tip that I learned last week was you can double tap, so 2-finger tap to undo and 3-finger tap to redo. So that's kind of a nifty little trick / tip. Okay, so that's basically my process whenever I'm creating anything iPad lettering related. I'll sketch it out first, then I'll bring it in, play around, move things around, recolor things, define different color palettes so I have an idea of color before I jump right into things. I always kind of think in color, so that really helps me. So I hope this was helpful. If you want to take your iPad lettering further, be sure to check out my Intro to iPad Lettering course on Skillshare, and I will leave a link on screen and in the video description. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please subscribe. I release a new design tutorial every single Tuesday, and don't forget to head on over to my blog, every-tuesday.com, for even more design tutorials and a bunch of design freebies. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.